my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth Women's Leadership Initiative Series session. And for those of you whom I may not know, I am Georgina Dodge. I'm the university's Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President and the Title IX Coordinator, and I'm very pleased to welcome you today. I'm also the former president of the Iowa Women's Network, the Iowa Network for Women in Higher Education. Whew, I know, trying to get all of that right and trying to spell from an acronym is always complicated. And they are the co-sponsor of the Women's Leadership Initiative Series. And that's a statewide organization that you are all eligible to become a part of. And their upcoming conference is going to be held in April up in Sioux City, so up in Northwest Iowa. And I welcome you to visit the website to find out more about that conference, to see what's on the program, in case you want to make that long drive with me. You're more than welcome to do so. And for some of you, I realize this may be your first time attending a Women's Leadership Initiative, and I'm very excited to have you join us, and I'm excited to see some people here that have been to some of our previous events as well. We're very glad to have you. On our website, you can actually access the discussion guides that are paired with our previous speakers, and we welcome you to do that and to use those in groups that may not be here today, or even groups who are here, so that you can continue the discussion, bring up new topics that may be of interest to your particular group as we look at developing women's leadership. As we know, there is much needed dialogue around the challenges that we as women face when we assume leadership positions. And so these conversations are much needed across all corners of the campus. And today, I have the great pleasure of introducing an incredible leader and colleague, Adrien Wing. We have been looking forward to having Adrien with us for quite some time. Her schedule is amazing. I complain often about my calendar, but my calendar doesn't take me out of the country as often as Adrien's calendar removes her from the United States. And we're very fortunate that she's here with us today to share some of her experiences. And let me provide a little bit of background about Professor Wing. Adrien K. Wing is the Bessie Dutton Professor at the University of Iowa College of Law, the Associate Dean for International and Comparative Law Programs, and the Director of the France Summer Abroad Program. She joined Iowa Law in 1987, so this fall marks her 30th year at the University of Iowa. I think that deserves a round of applause. Professor Wing received her bachelor's degree from Princeton with high honors, her MA degree from UCLA, my alma mater, in African Studies, and her JD from Stanford Law School. She practiced international law in New York for 5 years before joining the Iowa faculty. The author of over 130 publications, she teaches international human rights, law in the Muslim world, critical race theory, and sex discrimination. She is also editor of Critical Race Feminism and Global Critical Race Feminism. Professor Wing also serves as the director of the University of Iowa Center for Human Rights, which provides important community programming and has an international impact. She has advised the founding fathers and mothers of 3 constitutions, South Africa, Palestine, and Rwanda. Needless to say, she has held leadership positions in various organizations and currently serves on the American Bar Association's section of Legal Education Accreditation Committee, the American Society of International Law Executive Council, the American Association of Law Schools Recruitment and Retention of Minority Law Professors Committee, and the American Journal of Comparative Law Board of Editors. She is the co-chair of the Blacks of the American Society of International Law Task Force, a law school inspector for the American Bar Association, and a member of the American Law Institute. And I must say, I abridged that list substantially. Among her many national and international honors is one that's close to home for us. Professor Wing has received the Regents Award for Faculty Excellence from the state of Iowa. Today, we are honored to have Professor Wing talk with us about intersectional feminism, providing us some insight to her own success and brilliance. Please join me in welcoming Professor Adrien Wing. Thank you so much for being here.
Welcome, everyone. Glad you could take the time. As Georgina said, this is my 30th year on faculty, and it went by in a minute. I moved here from New York City following a husband. We thought we would be here 2 years and then go back to civilization on one of the coasts. And needless to say, I am proud to be the senior Black faculty member on the whole campus, not just the senior female, but the senior Black faculty member. And it's been a really wonderful time. I'm so happy that we have this women's initiative. Talk about my schedule. I have to leave here. I mean, I know this is over at 1, and I have to leave the building by 1:10 because at 1:30 I am chairing the Jessup International Moot Court at the College of Law, the finals, and so I have to get there and walk in looking very calm. So I'm glad I could come across town. I'm also glad I could be here because one of my granddaughters is she's a basketball player from Cedar Falls, and on Wednesday they won their quarterfinal round. And so now they are in the semifinals that starts at 1:30. And so unfortunately, because of these two obligations, I couldn't go, which is, of course, is ripping my heart that I couldn't be there for her. But if they win today, which I hope they will, the finals are tomorrow. This is in Des Moines, so I hope that will happen. And so I at least will be, I was at the quarterfinals and I'll be at the finals. So I'd also like to thank Elizabeth for being so gracious and staying in touch with me. I have sent this PowerPoint to her so that if any of you all afterward want to have a copy of it, you all have the master list. You're welcome to share it with the whole master list or to anybody that wants it. Of course, you could email me personally if you want. So I decided to call this talk Intersectional Feminism because in the Women's March that was recent and in other fora, this term intersectional feminism has come up a lot. So I thought I would talk about it generally and then also go into how we who are in law are using the term and using it in cases to get victories in situations where there's discrimination. So first, as an overall, maybe all of you know about this, the various types of feminist theory. How many people in here ever took a course on feminism or feminist theory when they were in school? Okay, a number of you did. And when I was in school, there were no such courses. So when I started teaching sex discrimination law is when I was able to learn doctrines that, you know, just were being developed when I was in school. Okay, so types of feminism. One type is called liberal feminism, meaning not liberal versus conservative, but liberal as in Western democracy style liberalism, where we all want our individual rights. So that could be that a woman wants to be an airplane pilot or a firefighter or a professor or something like that, something that she wants to do for herself. And often liberal feminism can be critiqued because it may or may not, or the people that espouse it may or may not really recognize how things can be intersectional. Nevertheless, I think all of us, most of us in the US would start from the base of liberal feminism that, okay, I can do what I'm doing right here at this university because I was able to have some choices or make some choices. Okay. Counterposed to liberal feminism is something called radical feminism. Some would call it socialist feminism, but it's left wing of the liberal feminism. Kitty McKinnon is probably the most famous woman known for this kind of feminism. And so it's going way beyond what you do on an individual basis to look at systems of oppression and how gender oppression is just embedded, in everything that we have in our society, and you need to do certain things. So if you haven't ever read Kitty McKinnon, she is a law scholar, You can, I would recommend her book here, Feminism Unmodified, a classic text. And then, just to show you just how unbelievable she is, she literally did a book called A Feminist Theory of the State. Mind-boggling. I met her when I was a law student. For some strange reason, I was put on a hiring committee as the token student when I was at Stanford, 1979. That committee said, oh, we're going to maybe try to get another woman on the faculty. There were only two. And so I didn't understand what's going on. We interviewed a bunch of women, and they said, well, some of these women, they actually want to write on like feminism rather than contract theory. And, that's not really law, and, I don't know that we want that kind of thing here. And so one of the people they turned down was a woman named Catherine McKinnon, who then goes on to do that feminism thing and become really super, super, super famous. So anyway, this is a picture of Kitty and I some years ago, but I ended up as a visiting professor at Michigan, and she's on the Michigan faculty when she's not on the Harvard faculty, and so she's become a dear friend of mine, and I had to tell her, I don't know if you remember me, but I was this young woman, and she says, I remember you, but yeah, because I'm a black girl sitting in front of her looking like, well, who are you? And so anyway, we've known each other over 30 years. All right. Now, you may sometimes hear the terms difference feminism or versus equality feminism. All these things can overlap. And so the equality feminism would be, we're all equal, male or female, so I should be able to do anything a man can do, versus difference feminism taking in account of the fact, yeah, but I can have a baby, and men can't have a baby. At least up to now, they can't have a baby. So to say that I should get the same 8 weeks off for having a baby as he got for breaking his arm is not helpful. So that's where the equality feminism is actually hurting us, because there are some things that are different with women, and so the law and the society would need to take account of that rather than acting like all those things are the same. So one of the things you also can get in this is the idea of difference, that women have certain different characteristics from men, not just biological. So part of this difference feminism, Carol Gilligan is probably one of the most prominent women, and she does what people call cultural feminism, the idea that women have a nurturing aspect to them that men don't. And so part of what makes women different is this ethic of care. This has been critiqued highly by many people to say, yeah, you're saying all women have this nurturing and ethic of care. All women are into protecting the vulnerable, et cetera, whereas all men are these individualist, autonomous risk takers. So, for instance, here we have who? Margaret Thatcher. From what we know of her, does she really fit into the nurturer kind of ethic? Not that we know of. Although you could say she nurtured a nation. Right? She nurtured a nation as prime minister, but she was not known, she was known as Iron Lady, right? Steel. And so she's just one prominent example. We all know plenty of people, maybe ourselves, who will not necessarily fit under the nurture, ethic of care kind of feminism. Needless to say, you could have parts of all of these within you at different parts of your life. And when I was growing up, I was a tomboy. I had Tonka toys. I had trucks. My father threw away a nursing kit that I was given back in 1963. He said, no daughter of mine will be a nurse. My father was a doctor. So that was pretty revolutionary stuff in 1963, especially since there were almost no black female doctors at all. So I grew up like that. I never babysat. I wasn't doing any kind of makeup or nails or any of these so-called feminine things. And then when I had a baby, my first baby, And I developed this whole nurturing aspect to myself that I had not previously exhibited. And so since that time, I now am what I call an other mother. I will nurture everyone. We can call it mentoring, but the idea that, to me, males and females need to be able to nurture people under whatever heading you call it, whether that be big brother, big sister, or mentoring a colleague, etc. So in other words, I've adopted the idea of the ethic of care and nurturing, but in my own context for what works for me. Okay, you may also get other names for feminism. There are many women who are religious in all of the religions, and some of them will call themselves feminist and will call themselves a religious feminist. I have friends, I specialize in the Middle East, who will say I'm an Islamic feminist. And some people say, I don't understand that. I thought in Islam, a man can have 4 wives. You can have things where you're clearly not equal under the Islamic law. And yet those women will say, okay, those are actual cultural practices that have intersected in ways historically that don't need to be the case now. And so I am Muslim. I am not saying I'm not Muslim, but I'm saying you can be a feminist and still be in your religion. And so likewise, in all the religions, there will be some of the women who are practitioners of that religion who will see themselves in a feminist light within their religion. We know there are many nuns in the Catholic Church, et cetera, who have challenged the patriarchy and the idea that they aren't able to be priests, et cetera. And of course, a lot of them have been victimized and pushed out or excommunicated for daring to challenge that kind of status quo. Of course, there is lesbian feminism, there is trans feminism, there can be whatever term you want to use, bisexual feminism. So there are people who will identify primarily in that context, but you can see it all can intersect with everything I'm showing you and everything on this page too. Now, the last one, white feminism, isn't necessarily what someone calls themselves. It's what the other groups will call white women who are feminists. And so there are often a lot of critiques of traditional feminism, which is seen as white, middle-class women, often liberal in orientation, focusing on what they individually want to do. So, okay, I want to go to work and have a job. Yeah, but then you don't acknowledge that it's a woman of color that is watching your kids at very low wages to enable you to be liberated. So you're like, great, you're liberated, but are you taking into account what else you may be doing, rather than the revolutionary idea that, oh, imagine if your husband actually took care of his own kids sometime, rather than regard it as him doing you a favor to babysit the children, right? So you have some of these ideas coming out. Then moving to Black women specifically, you have something that developed called womanism to distinguish itself from the generic white feminism. And so I'll show a picture in a minute. Alice Walker is known for this term of being a womanist. And since she's African American, she was basing it from her context, but it could be from other contexts as well. Implicit is that it's, contrary to the white feminism, okay? Then some Black women may or may not use the term womanism, but they may just say, I'm a Black feminist. Okay, and so you can hear different terms. They can be the same thing or overlapping, but I'm just bringing up terms that you might see if you're reading articles or the media, etc. I want to bring up someone who I hope everyone in here is familiar with her. Way before we had this terminology, way before there were women of any color really going to universities. during the slave era. She was interacting and is, there's some debate whether or not she really said this speech or not, but it's very famous. And then her arm, of course, going up is used by many, many people in their ads, etc. So I just will read this little bit where she says, "That man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most all of them sold off to slavery. And when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman?" So, I mean, everyone should know this speech, right? It's just so powerful, so amazing that she could say that in a context when so much of the country was experiencing slavery. Jumping up 100-something years, here you have Alice Walker. She has a lot of different books, wonderful books, literature, etc. I commend to you. Then same period, modern period, we have Angela Davis. She's spoken here at Iowa a number of times, another friend of mine for many decades. She has two books in particular where she's intersecting the race and the class and the gender issues. And so her most famous one is probably Women, Race, and Class. And then she has one focusing on blues women, etc. And she was, the last picture over there, she was at the Women's March as one of the speakers. And I heard there were some people saying, "Who is that?" Like millennials. "Why is that woman up there?" Like having no idea who she is. So you get then the term intersectionality or intersectionalism, where you're looking at the intersections of the different forms of discrimination. So Black feminism inherently looks at those intersections, but it doesn't have to be in Black feminism. You have the late Audre Lorde, another person I commend to all of you to read her work if you haven't. And she has many wonderful famous sayings, but there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we don't live single issue lives. And yet in our lives, they'll often be like, okay, pretend you're a woman today, tomorrow pretend you're a professor, the next day pretend you're a Black, and as if you had this linear way of existing, instead of every day you could be Black, a professor, and a woman. So you will see lots of wonderful signs and posters that play on Sojourner and show all the different groups of color. But I want to bring to you, intersectionalism isn't just about women of color, because white women themselves have a color, they have a race, they have an ethnicity. Everyone has all of those. So some people think, oh, that intersectionalism, that's only for the people of color. Well, no, it's for everyone. In other words, if you're white, you need to acknowledge your whiteness, what we call white privilege, within all of your various identities. So maybe you are discriminated against on the one hand because of X, but you may also have privileging because of the whiteness in your identity. So now I'm going to move on to what we in law have been doing with respect to this intersectional feminism. First of all, not intersectional. Kitty McKinnon is a law professor, and so, she's clearly the most famous feminist jurisprudence person. But in terms of women of color, I am the editor of the main anthology that deals with intersectional feminism, and it's called Critical Race Feminism, and I'm going to just highlight where we get this term from. The term has a certain meaning. The last edition of this reader I did in 2003. I haven't had time. I'm mainly an administrator at this point in my career, from what you could tell from what Georgina said. So I don't have time. I am using this reader in my critical race theory class right now, and every single thing in it is still right on point and relevant. We have resolved nothing in terms of any of the issues. So anyway, so I have the second edition of this reader, 2003, in case anybody is interested in seeing a big collection, all written by women who are law professors, talking about different aspects of the law. So the critical in critical race feminism is part of something we often call critical networks in law. And critical networks started in the 70s with critical legal studies. This was one of my professors at Stanford, Mark Kelman. And so in the 70s, you had white men who had been radical in the 60s as students. They grow up, some of them go to law school, they become law professors, but meanwhile, they're still radical. And so they said, we don't like this whole stuff you learn in law school. The whole thing in law school is all about white men with power, white men with property. That's what the Constitution is founded on. And so in the 70s, they start developing a leftist or a radical or a socialist critique of law. And so that terminology gets used even up to today. And there's a variety of books that are out on critical legal studies. And a lot of it was inspired by what was happening in Europe with French postmodernist theory and the deconstruction idea that we'll deconstruct the law and we'll look at it and we'll put it back together. And so that's where we get the term critical in critical race feminism. This critical legal studies was attractive to a lot of people, including to women and people of color who began to become professors, like by the 80s. But what we said to these radical white men is, you all talk about class, but you don't understand gender and you don't understand race. Because they thought, well, everything can be understood as class. So people began to become professors who said that's not the case. So we get two related themes, one called critical race theory, which is the course I'm teaching, and then feminist jurisprudence as well starts splitting off. So we're still kind of part of the critical networks, but each split off, and there's dozens of books and articles, et cetera. So critical race theory, if any of you all are interested in looking at any of the readers that exist on critical race theory, these are some of them. This little black and white book, Critical Race Theory, is 100 pages, very simple, meant to be taught to undergrads or to people who are not law people and just want to get access to what's happening. Derek Bell was one of the founders of critical race theory. He passed away. Richard Delgado is still alive. And at the top, Lonnie Guinier, still alive, teaching at Harvard. And so you have lots of books talking about race from a progressive perspective, all from a progressive left-of-wing perspective. We won't go into all the detail, but the main thing to know is that critical race is adding race to the progressives. In other words, like Bernie Sanders coming, Black Lives Matters coming into Bernie and saying, Bernie, man, you got to deal with this race thing. Okay? At the same time, critical race theory comes in to the left of the civil rights people. So it would say traditional civil rights organizations, NAACP, you're all too conservative. You're all dealing with Band-Aids. So for instance, the other day, we just had the spectacle of the presidents of black colleges going to be in the White House, right? There's 100 roughly black colleges. And, I guess Omarosa on the staff of the president said, oh, we should bring them in. It's Black History Month. And so they brought them all in. You've all probably seen the picture that focuses on Ms. Conway, who was sitting with her legs up, with her heels in the couch. I'm sure everyone has seen that one. Well, in the picture are these black college presidents. Okay, so they meet with the president, smile, grin, and does Massa give anything to them? He gives them an executive order that orders nothing, doesn't give them one penny. A critical race person could predict that. It's like you all went thinking if you bow down to Massa Trump, he's going to give you all something to help you. And he did, a piece of paper. We know what you could do with a piece of paper, right? So it's very understandable. And then they're all humiliated, and all their schools are looking at them like, what were you thinking? And they're all on the defense because you look like fools, thinking he was actually going to give you something or something. That man couldn't spare, $5 million out of his pocket for the schools? No, not a penny, not one penny. Anyway, so that would be like a critical race analysis of what that was. Okay. So anyway, I won't go into the others right now. If you ask for the of this PowerPoint, you can have it. But one thing at the bottom is something called the narrative. We often tell stories to explain things because people can relate to stories. And the idea of praxis. So not just the theory of how does feminist jurisprudence work, but on the ground, how do we actually handle cases? Praxis, in other words, the intersection of theory and practice. So out of critical race theory has spun a whole lot of other subgenres, all of which have a feminist aspect to them. So we have something called critical white studies that talks about the white supremacy, white privileging, that's a reader. We have Latino Crit, there's a whole organization. On the left here is one of the founders of Lat Crit. Then we have Queer Race Crit, the same person also is a founder of Queer Race Crit. And then we have Asian Crit, Indian Crit on the left, on the far end. And then I didn't have a picture. We have something that's developing called Discrit, which is about people with disabilities who are people of color, who, as you would imagine, suffer multiple discrimination from every sector. And one of the things we really do in critical race feminism is we especially look to the bottom. We look to the situation of masses of women, not the situation so much of what's happening at the top to the doctors and lawyers and people in the top of government, although that still is important, but looking at what is happening to the masses of people, especially women of color. Now, what's interesting here, in my own work, when we look at intersection, I've been mentioning race and color and ethnicity and gender, but you see here, we have lots of other identities that we have that can intersect, such as your marital status, your language status, your minority status in your country, are you a minority or not? Your age, sexual orientation, disability, and one I coined stature, meaning how you look within your culture. So the more you meet the standard of beauty within your culture, the better you do from the time you're a little child, that everybody says, oh, how cute you are, all the way up to when you're in the Senate or you're, fashion model or whatever you are, where your looks have had a factor in how well you have done. So you can intersect all of those. Unfortunately, most of the writing only will look at a couple of intersections. And I think it's important to look at more of them simultaneously so that if you were going to help somebody, it doesn't help that, oh, this woman is poor, but you didn't look at her disability, that she has a mental illness or she has alcoholism. And so you're trying to treat her one way, but you've left that out altogether. So that's just an example to get you to be thinking a little bit more about this. Okay, so another thing, we use the term in critical race feminism, anti-essentialist. I showed you the slide before about Gilligan. Is it essentialist to say all women are into caring? So we're the opposite of that. We're into do not just lump all women, all blacks, all gays, all whatever group in a lump and think everybody in any category behaves the same way. They don't. That's just not how it is. This is Angela Harris. She's written a lot about anti-essentialism. Kim Crenshaw, who is on the faculty of both Columbia Law School and UCLA, is the best known proponent of intersectionalism. She is the foremother of intersectionalism. So her name comes up a lot. She formed a group here, the African American Forum. So she went beyond theory and books into praxis. So she created an organization here, African American Forum, and it's very involved on the grassroots level. So imagine there, she's going to have a week on the status of Black women during Black History Month. And they've been very involved with Black Lives Matters. They've been very involved with lots of marches. And so this kind of organization is a wonderful way for people who are in law to say, hey, we can contribute not just by doing a lawsuit, but by having NGOs, non-governmental organizations, that are on the front line of trying to help people. Then also with critical race feminism, there's a global level, the international level that is involved. And this is another reader of mine, Global Critical Race Feminism, that looks at international issues, human rights, et cetera. And all of that intersects with domestic issues. So you can't talk about discrimination and think it stops or starts at the US border. I mean, we just look at all of the immigration issues, the Islamophobia issues, and so many others. Okay, I'll just give you a few case studies before I open it up for your questions, so you can learn a little bit about how the law in the US has dealt with women of color. This is a very famous case in 1977 where some Black women sued General Motors, right? So the evidence reveals that they didn't hire any Black women before a certain year, and then people lost their jobs, right? So the court wouldn't let them bring a gender case because there were white women that this didn't happen to, and it wouldn't let them bring a race case because there's Black men that it didn't happen to. So it meant that Black women could not represent anybody. And so that case is very typical across the country, where judges who are still mainly white men only think linear, and then you fall outside of their line, and it's very frustrating. One of the issues where race and gender comes up in the workplace is the whole issue of hairstyles. And Black women, have so many different hairstyles. And do you think an employer has to accommodate these hairstyles? No, no. This is the United States. This is capitalist America. If I got my company and I want you to look a certain way and I don't want these braids or these other things, I can say to you, that's not the proper attire. I want everybody to look clean and neat as they define it. So there are many, many cases where varieties of people, not just Black women, but others will say, I have to wear this, I have to do this, and usually the employer wins, and the employee has to comply or, stay fired. Except, right, so here you have where the grooming policies are not going to be subject to, the employer's right, employees' right to wear their hairstyles, okay? So, but just recently, the Army, which had been criticized over its hair policies, which were, of course, normed on white women, or white men, and then, of course, white women, they have changed their hair policy very, very recently, so that now women could wear dreadlocks, which were banned. And so there's dreadlocks, there's thin braids, there's all these things. And so, I'm thinking at the top here, you must have Black women who are generals and, very high-ranking people who were able to get to a point where they could change these things. Because it's so radical now. It's like, what? They're now going to allow dreadlocks. Probably, though, the dreadlocks still must be like 2 inches or whatever's the length that's allowed, but at least, you could wear them. So the Army, in other words, will be ahead of where the business sector is. Were any of you here when this case came up? None of you? Just one? Oh, my goodness. This was two out of this whole room. This is Dr. Jean Ju, used to be on faculty in the College of Medicine, Department of Anatomy. This university and the Board of Regents were found liable for harassment against her, right? She had to file a lawsuit saying one of her colleagues and other members of her department spread rumors about her, including she was sleeping with the boss, etc., defamatory statements. The most famous one that I remember, in the men faculty bathroom, it said, "chink pussy." Can you imagine one of your colleagues writing some words like that about you? And she went all up the ranks of the university trying to get help, and it was just horrific. She endured it in silence. She didn't tell her family. She wasn't married, but she didn't tell her family and other, where they lived in the other part of the country. They didn't know until it made the front of Time magazine. Not a good way for us to make the front of Time magazine. So the judge ordered her promoted to full professor. She got back pay. She got a personal judgment of $35,000 against her colleague, which the university paid. Yeah, paid for his lawyer and paid the judgment. What is that saying? Anyway, today, I hope all of you have heard of the Jean Ju Award. Well, I just showed you the background to that. So she's got this award. Now, she retired now, but she told me, even though she won that award, she was never treated properly. You can win a lawsuit and you're still in a hell. We had this young lady, is a professor, and she went on social media. This could be any of us. She went on social media. She said something about white males, tweeted about them. And so people wanted her fired because she said something about white males. The campus supported her and said she had a right to free speech, etc. She did apologize for what she said. So the whole area of social media is just full of, situations where we know there are people who are being fired. People who are being fired for calling Mrs. Obama a gorilla, an animal, whatever. Well, what I think is going to happen now is everything's going to be reversed. So it'll be like this. If you say something in your social media that critiques the powers that be, they'll say you're the racist, you're the one discriminating, you're violating the code, and we'll see a lot more of this where, she would have just lost her job. This woman intersects with religion. She was in a Christian school and put on a hijab in solidarity with Muslims, made a very bold statement for that school, apparently, and so they basically pushed her out, and she's visiting at UVA. So just the idea of that situation, and she had signed a code that all faculty have to sign that they'll abide by whatever the principles of that denomination. The most famous case, last case that I'll talk about, was in the US Supreme Court, the Abercrombie and Fitch case. It is a fabulous case, so wonderful. And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled against Abercrombie that had this whole thing about whether you have the right look, the American look. And they decided a woman with a headscarf didn't have the right look for them. And so the EEOC from the government filed suit, etc., and the government won. So now Abercrombie's policy has changed. So the look can now include headgear, including headscarves. So that's an unbelievable victory out of the US Supreme Court 2015. Now, if we get a nice person on the Supreme Court, conservative man, who knows if that comes up again, but this was fabulous. This is absolutely fabulous. So the last slide, basically, what's going to happen in the upcoming months? Here's a wonderful array of women who are on the front lines, from our Senator Elizabeth Warren, from newly elected California Senator Kamala Harris, who is mixed African-American and Indian from India. Anybody know her in the bottom? Tammy Duckworth, who is Thai and I believe white. And she is disabled, a disabled veteran. And also this young woman is one of the young women who is intersecting that I am American and I am Muslim. and I will not have anybody say I'm not American. And so we have to think, what's going to happen over this next 6 months. Hey, we're only in month 2, and I'm worn out. So we can't be worn out. We definitely have to gird ourselves for the difficult days ahead. It's not going to be as difficult as it was for Sojourner Truth, right? So just, everybody think about how are we going to face all the challenges. And some of us in here are professors, so our students are looking up to us. Our staff members are looking up to us. Our families are looking up to us. And it seems like a heavy burden to carry. But I really feel energized. I feel fired up and ready to go. And every single day, that's what I'm doing. And I feel privileged that I've gotten to this point in the United States of America where somebody like me can be where I am, and I intend to always use my voice to speak out. Keep calm and carry on, but on the other hand, decide when will I speak out, knowing that there could be an incredible backlash. I'm the director of the Center for Human Rights, and I'm scared if I say certain things, and we say certain things, is somebody going to come in from outside in the legislature or the regents or something and say, what's happening here? But we are the Center for Human Rights. We can't be silent over so many of the things that are going on. So with this, I will stop my presentation, and I will open up for any questions that you all might have. And also feel free, if you want to get in touch with me, to email me, and I'd be happy to carry on a conversation. So thank you very much.